stuff, because I think that's really more the relevant thing, like in terms of, how do you think this factors into discussion of fragility or whiteness? Like just thinking about how that made you feel and the position it put you in, depending on whether you were in group 1 or group 2. Let's talk about that.
Well, it felt very dismissive. I mean, there were people in the other group that I like, and I, would normally, but then I just felt very dismissive.
When someone would look away from you?
Yeah, when I did it, that was
Nice. Yeah.
I am like trying to get better at making eye contact, but I also, what you said about like, oh, it would feel so much easier to look away. I mean, it was hard to be confident, and it just made me realize that there's no communication for either of us to say whether we want eye contact or not. There's no consent going on, because we all have like different ideas of like, does that person want me to look at them or not look at them, and like, do I want to look at them or not look at them, like, we don't know. And
Right.
we have to like guess and anticipate like the infinite possibilities of where we're both at. And
Sure.
what's going on between us that we're not talking about.
And eye contact sort of forces acknowledgement and almost confrontation. Like you have to, then there's a connection happening. It happens instantly. It's like, and so if you look away, that sort of breaks it, and then I don't have to actually acknowledge you.
And with the issue of race, it brings up all the whole things that surround it.
There's a lot of power behind it. Yeah.
Going back to especially how it made me feel and sort of reminded me of lots of interactions I have. I sort of, looking away from someone quickly, I get a lot of the similar feeling of like when I sort of, or like I become really keenly aware of the implications that it has within interactions. Like if like I'm doing that with someone, like a person of color, because all of a sudden I had this moment of like, oh my god, like now like they're gonna be like, yep, there's another white person who doesn't want to look at me, or like doesn't want to make eye contact. In the same way that like if I cross the street and I go, I just crossed the street because I needed to, but it was like right in front of like a big group of like kids who were just hanging out in the corner, and now they think that I crossed the street because I'm scared of them, and like, oh god. And it'd be even worse if I went back over and was like, hi, I wasn't because I'm scared of you. Yes, there's just like in this instant thing of like, all of a sudden these unspoken power dynamics come forward.
Yeah, and this is great. Like this is part of what we're talking about is this meta-narrative around feelings, around what is the power relationship that just happened, where am I in that, where are they in that, how do they feel about that even though I don't know and I don't want to confirm it, so I'm going to assume things, and there's all of this stuff wrapped up just in how we either meet or do not meet each other's eyes. And that's just base level. That is, and I'm glad you brought into the narrative, like, how does that translate if I'm looking at a person of color and I'm the white guy and stuff like that? Or vice versa. How does that translate if you're a person of color looking at a white person? I mean, it goes both ways. It's not necessarily an innocent process, but I think part of what we're here to talk about today is that meta-narrative, is that internal, what's going on in these moments, how do I feel, how does that affect how I behave, and things of that nature. Does that make some sense to folks? Yeah.
I come from a multiracial family, and it's funny because my relatives who are black or other color will always talk about like the white guy smile, like if you make eye contact, it's like awkward smile, and it's kind of like, well then what are you supposed to do? I smile at everybody. But then, so now that I'm conscious of that, and now I'm doing the white guy smile. So this is an interesting thing. It's like there is as much as I don't even think of myself as having the awkwardness, there is that moment always that it's like, am I doing the white guy smile or is it just a normal smile? Like.
You overthink it, question yourself.
Yeah, and then it makes it awkward.
Right.
And then I feel like I'm just kind of feeding into the thing, but it's a real thing.
It is a real thing. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that too. So I want to build on this. I think we were going to move things forward in terms of. It sounds like everybody kind of knows the rules, right? What was Group 1's rule?
Look away.
Look away. What was Group 2's rule?
Maintain eye contact.
That part was so hard.
I know, there was some like staring.
And actually, like group one, it was look away and look back.
Yeah, it's kind of like a.
Which is hard to do without.
It's hard when you're moving too,
Moving
especially.
around,
Yeah,
Sometimes they'd be like passing you and
Whiplash.
give someone like a side eye or something.
Yeah.
Like, that's even worse.
isn't it? Yeah, and actually, I mean, I use this all the time to talk about power in relationships, you know? And I think that's part of what's gonna be in our conversation today, is like how looking at that power and questioning that power creates more feelings inside of us, so.
So what is whiteness? Anyone dare to throw it out there?
Privilege.
Privilege is part of it, yeah, it is. Just want to make sure we know why we're here.
Is it kind of like the lack of knowledge that other people are going through because of the privilege that you have every day? So you things that you don't see because of it, and you don't realize, therefore they, to some people, do not exist, even though they do.
Another part of whiteness, yeah. It's all part of it, yeah.
Well, I mean, coming from a family of historians, I always want to take the historical context, but like it's a classification that has been created, especially by Western Europeans, to sort of create discrete groups to justify the superiority of one group, obviously, shockingly their own, over people that were not viewed as the same, to help justify and also enforce and maintain these sort of very disproportionate and unfair power balances within sort of the context of, otherwise, much more difficult and nuanced interactions, so they can be boiled down quickly and, determine who's part of us and who's not.
Dr. Harrison yesterday eloquently, if you were here, you could hear him speak about how the Irish became white, how Italians became white, right? And those were two of the groups that he talked about, right? So, others, in terms of whiteness and defining whiteness?
When I think of whiteness, I think of people, it's the unnamed, unseen, untalked about thing. So it's the standard, it's the normal. You've got people and people of color. And that's what establishes whiteness. Just this idea, and I never hear anyone say, I'm just African American. I always hear, I'm just white.
Yeah.
And it's that unexamined, unself-reflective idea that, well, I'm just a person.
Yeah.
Y'all are marked
Yeah.
because you're not white. And so it's an undefined, unspoken thing. Adjectiveless.
Anybody else? All right, well, we'll move on. So here are some definitions. Okay, so you talked about this a little bit, right? The historic, right? The direction of power between whites and people of color is historic, traditional, normalized, deeply embedded in our society. Refers to the specific dimensions of racism that serve to elevate white people and people of color. And this counters the dominant, the traditional definition that people have been using, where we think about racism in terms of discrete behaviors, right? That some individuals may or may not be demonstrating, like, so he's a racist or she's a racist, right? When they're not, right? So that has been the conversation for so long, and whiteness takes it beyond that, right? Looking at structural, historic, deeply embedded racism in our society, right? It's a blanket over our whole society. It affects all of us, right? Oops. Oh, it is here. Yeah. So just some more definitions.
Sure. We're talking about, whiteness it's about structural things, It's a what kind of boundary, what are the boundaries of our lives and what directs our lives. It's not, me or you, although we participate in it. It's far bigger than individuals, which is what Tanya was just saying. And I like, that it's a standpoint too. I think that's an important kind of piece of this. In terms of, especially your point that you made earlier, in terms of like, there's people and then there's people of color. Like that's a really great illumination of that notion of standpoint. So, we come across, or we believe ourselves as normal and others as others. And I think that's really, really clear and key. And then I think the third one here, in terms of cultural practices, that's another thing that I think D'Angelo and a few other authors have talked about in terms of like the undefined nature of what whiteness is. I know like the author Toni Morrison kind of talks about this on occasion in various places. There's a wonderful video of her speaking to Charlie Rose, kind of illuminating us about the fact that all authors write about race. It's just that they're always writing from the perspective of their own, and so I think her bringing that into the conversation with Charlie Rose in that segment was a little bit, it took Charlie aback, and I think that's part of why Toni said. But that's, I think, where we start to get into, I guess, the discomfort of like being interrogated, because speaking of standpoint, and speaking of like the othering of like there's people and people of color, like once we start turning that lens back on the people and what that means and what the cultural practices are, that's where the discomfort starts to come. At least for white people, I feel, because they're not used to being under that lens. They're used to being directing of that lens, if that makes sense. So, yeah. So I think the next thing, let's leave it here. So what I want is like, I want you to pair up with someone near you in 2s or 3s. So gather together. And Charlie's going to come around with an envelope. And inside the envelope, we've decided to put together just a simple kit representing 6 different emotional states. So once you get your envelope, I want you to go through and I want you to pick up the emotions that are in that envelope that you feel are the things that come up for you when you read that question.
Think about the first time you heard the name Whiteness History Month. What bothered you about that term?